She always said it was the wrong door. A little girl in pajamas, flashlight in hand, knocking after dark. "Oops, sorry," she'd smile. But one night she didn't smile. She just whispered, "He gets mad when I cry." That's when Mr. Bennett stopped waiting and started listening. If you believe some knocks aren't accidents, they're cries for help. Like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Mr. Bennett had never expected to spend his twilight years in a small apartment complex, but life had a habit of steering people in unexpected directions. He was 62, retired from the army, and widowed for over a decade. He had served in places too remote for most people to imagine, lost friends in battles that the nightly news never fully explained, and come home to a wife who eventually succumbed to an illness that modern medicine couldn't fend off. Alone but not bitter, he found a quiet solace in the building's second-floor corner unit, apartment 2C, where he could keep to himself yet still watch over the hallway out of habit. He wasn't one to meddle in other people's business. After all, the army had instilled in him a certain discipline. You minded your own tasks unless there was a direct call for intervention. But Mr. Bennett also had a steadfast moral code. If he saw trouble, he could never walk away from it. It was late summer when he first noticed the girl. The building tended to get warm, and the landlord often put up fans in the corridors. One of those fans sat right beside Mr. Bennett's door, its muted hum providing background noise to the hush of evening. That hum was the only reason he heard the soft tapping on his door 3 nights in a row. She appeared under the flickering hallway light, dressed in pajamas a size or two too big, holding a tiny flashlight in her hand. She always spoke the same phrase, "Oops, wrong door," followed by a shy, apologetic smile, then disappeared before he could say anything. The first time it happened, he assumed she had mistaken his unit for someone else's. The second time, suspicion stirred. By the third night, he was certain her visits were no accident. Mr. Bennett set down his coffee mug the moment he heard that hesitant, almost ghostly knock again. He walked to his door, glanced through the peephole, and saw her. Same pajamas. Same little flashlight. Same uneasy twist of her lips. When he opened the door, she mumbled, "Oops, wrong door," and scrambled away. He called after her, but she turned the corner toward the stairs before he could get a proper glimpse of her face. Something about the nervous energy in her voice and the way she gripped that flashlight told him everything was not as innocent as it seemed. He tried to shake off his worries, reminding himself he was just an old man with a habit of reading too much into small details. But each night he found himself listening more keenly for footsteps outside in the hallway. Was there a reason behind that particular unit upstairs? He recalled that a new tenant had moved into 3D not long ago. A man no one seemed to know well. Mr. Bennett had only seen him once in the mailroom, wearing a jacket zipped up to his neck in the middle of a hot July afternoon. The man had pale eyes that shifted too often and a voice that sounded like forced politeness. They exchanged brief greetings, then went their separate ways. On the 4th night, the girl didn't knock. Instead, Mr. Bennett heard muffled noises above his ceiling. A soft thud, a yelp quickly stifled, then the squeak of running water. He stared at the light fixture overhead, half expecting it to tremble, but everything remained still. When the faint sound stopped, he was left with a sinking feeling that he should do something. He tried to occupy his mind by cleaning his kitchen, wiping down the counters until they sparkled, but sleep never came easily that night. Early the next morning, he left a small note taped to his door. "If you need help, knock again." It was vague enough not to raise suspicion for anyone else, but maybe the girl would understand. He spent the day strolling around the neighborhood, picking up groceries and quietly wondering if he was overreacting. He told himself he'd wait and see if there was any more sign of trouble. That evening, the knock did come, but the girl's words were different this time. She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. Her hair was slightly damp, and he could smell the faint scent of shampoo that reminded him of antiseptic soap. She whispered, "He gets mad when I cry inside." A heavy weight settled on Mr. Bennett's chest. It wasn't a playful child's game, it was a coded call for help. Something in her trembling voice, in the way she glanced behind her shoulder at the corridor, lit a fuse in his mind. He told her gently, "You can wait here anytime you need to," and ushered her away so she wouldn't linger in the hallway. She didn't stay long. She declined his offer for water or a snack, mumbled a soft thank you and slipped back upstairs. Mr. Bennett spent that night with the phone on the table beside him, half wondering if he should call the authorities. But he didn't know this girl's name, her family situation, or the intricacies of what might be going on. He'd known from the army that a wrong move made too soon could sometimes do more harm than good. Still, he couldn't shake the image of those frightened eyes. An unsettling clatter from upstairs jarred him awake around midnight. He put on slippers, pressing his ear to his ceiling. The muffled sound of angry shouting vibrated through the vents, and something crashed against the floor. There was a momentary hush, followed by hushed whimpers. He grabbed his phone and dialed an old army friend who worked in child services. Her name was Denise, and they had served together in a logistics unit years before. If anyone could help him discreetly gather information, it was Denise. The call was brief and purposeful. Mr. Bennett explained the situation. No names, no official addresses. Just a request for her to do some background checking on a certain man in 3D. Denise was cautious but promised to see what she could find, given his instincts. She had trusted him on more than one high-risk operation before. If he said something was wrong, she believed him. 2 days went by without another late-night knock. Mr. Bennett tried not to pace the hallways, but each time he stepped out to check his mail, he found himself glancing at the door to 3D. The name next to the buzzer read, Daniels. It was written with a fine-tip marker in uneven handwriting. Nobody else in the building seemed to know or care about him. People in big complexes rarely formed strong bonds unless something dramatic happened. By the third day, Denise called back. Her voice was grim. There were apparently conflicting records under the name Daniels, aliases maybe. One spelled with a double L, one spelled differently. She found references to old adoption paperwork that looked suspicious. She mentioned 3 different last names used by the same individual, scattered across multiple counties. One record from out of state was sealed but labeled inconclusive. Denise's tone said everything Mr. Bennett needed to know. That evening, as Mr. Bennett folded laundry in his living room, he heard the softest knock once more. When he opened the door, the girl stood there without saying a word. She looked shaken, holding her little flashlight so tightly her knuckles were white. He saw faint bruises on her forearm, shadows of fingerprints. Her voice trembled as she murmured, "If he finds out, I lose breakfast for a week." She gave a small, quivering shrug as if she expected him to brush it off. He felt anger pulse through him, not just an emotion but a raw surge of protective outrage that hammered against his chest. He knelt down to her eye level and said, "You can stay here." She looked torn, as though the fear of punishment was warring with her need to escape. Finally she gave a tiny nod. Mr. Bennett guided her gently inside. He told her to sit on the couch. The overhead light was warm, giving the living room a soft glow. She stared at her hands, but he noticed she kept glancing toward the door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Quietly he locked the door behind her. Something in him snapped into the old discipline of his service days. He remembered how to move silently, how to measure each breath. Before she could protest, he stepped into his bedroom, rummaged through a trunk of old gear, and found a set of heavy-duty zip ties he had once kept for emergencies. He took one last look at the door to make sure it was secure, then he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'll be back," he said in the calmest tone he could manage. She opened her mouth to speak, but he shook his head. "Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone but me." Stepping into the hallway, he felt the adrenaline coursing through his veins. His ribs ached slightly at the memory of old injuries, but he ignored the discomfort. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, careful to keep his footfalls light. Outside 3D he paused and listened. There was no noise from within, just a tense silence as though the entire apartment were holding its breath. He knocked once, firmly. The door swung open a crack and the man from the mailroom, pale eyes, tense posture, stood on the other side, a sneer twisting his features. "What do you want, old man?" he spat. Mr. Bennett spoke in a measured voice refined by years of commanding troops. "You've got a scared little girl knocking on strangers' doors at night. I'm going to ask you once to step aside." The man's sneer deepened. He tried to shut the door, but Mr. Bennett braced it with his shoulder. The confrontation was swift. The man threw a punch, a wild swing fueled by panic and arrogance. It caught Mr. Bennett in the side, jolting him against the doorframe. Pain ignited under his ribs, but he had faced worse. He channeled the muscle memory of close combat training. With a quick twist, he grabbed the man's arm, used his momentum against him, and rammed him against the hallway wall. The man yowled as Mr. Bennett forced him to the ground, pinned him by driving his knee into the small of his back. Flailing, the man kicked wildly, cursing in vicious undertones. Mr. Bennett felt a white-hot ache in his side from that initial punch, but he pushed through it. He used one of his zip ties to secure the man's wrists behind his back. The man spat vile threats, struggling to free himself. "You won't get away with this," he snarled. "I don't think you will either," Mr. Bennett said quietly, feeling his heart pound in his chest. Sweat beaded at his temples. but relief coursed through him as he heard the faint sound of a neighbor's door open. Someone gasped, then shouted for the police. By the time the authorities arrived, Mr. Bennett had the man pinned against the hallway floor. 2 officers took in the scene, an old soldier restraining a furious tenant, and moved to take control. The man screeched accusations, claiming innocence, but the uniformed officers weren't buying it. Mr. Bennett stood aside, wincing at the pain in his ribs, as they hoisted the man to his feet and began to question him. More neighbors poured into the corridor, their whispered commentary filling the air. Moments later, a woman in a child services vest arrived, phone in hand. She briefly locked eyes with Mr. Bennett and gave him a single nod of recognition. Denise must have pulled some serious strings to get someone there that fast. The building's lights reflected off the man's sweaty face as he realized how dire his situation had become. Under pressure, he muttered conflicting claims about the girl's identity, giving a name that didn't match his own. The authorities soon discovered his files were riddled with inconsistencies, fake adoption papers, multiple aliases, and an extensive background that suggested he'd been running for some time. Down in 2C, Mr. Bennett found the girl on his couch, her tiny flashlight cradled against her chest. Her eyes were wide with fear at first, as if she expected the worst. The tension in his shoulders melted when he saw that she was unharmed. He sat down next to her, taking slow breaths to steady his pulse. The whir of sirens outside served as the night's unsettling soundtrack. She asked, "Is he going to come back?" in a trembling voice that made his heart twist. He gently handed her a mug of tea, remembering how his wife had always insisted that a sweet drink could soothe rattled nerves. The girl clutched the mug, took a sip, then looked up at Mr. Bennett with a mixture of caution and hope. He managed a small smile, wanting to reassure her but also knowing she had a long road ahead. "Not tonight," he said simply. Outside, the corridor buzzed with urgent voices, but Mr. Bennett's apartment felt calm, like an island of safety. The girl took another sip of tea, wrinkling her nose at the strong brew, then added too much sugar from the bowl on the coffee table. He let her, watching as she stirred it quietly. He could hear an officer speaking to neighbors, collecting statements, and child services staff discussing next steps. After a moment, the girl set her mug down and spoke again, her voice so small he had to lean in. "If I don't have anywhere else to go, could I stay here?" She curled her fingers around the couch cushion, bracing for rejection. Mr. Bennett didn't answer right away. He felt the familiar sting of tears he never allowed himself to shed, the weight of his own memories, of battles, loss, and the quiet emptiness that had haunted him for so long. But he forced the surge of emotion down, focusing on the only thing that mattered in that moment, this child who had been seeking solace in the hallway for nights on end. He simply nodded and placed his hand gently over hers, telling her without words that he wouldn't leave her in the cold. Then he took the sugar bowl and offered it again, and she laughed softly through her tears as she spooned yet another heaping mound into her cup. The swirl of sugar dissolved into the tea, and for the first time that night, she looked as though she believed she might be safe. He heard the click of an officer's footsteps outside, the crisp rustling of paperwork, the clamor of muffled radios. None of that mattered in the gentle circle of lamplight that surrounded them. She took a slow sip of the sugary tea, then reached out to set her flashlight on the table. The lens was chipped and the battery panel was taped shut, but it was clearly important to her. Mr. Bennett realized how much comfort that little beam of light must have given her in the darkness upstairs. He exhaled a breath he felt he had been holding for days, maybe weeks. The knowledge that the man in 3D wouldn't be harming her tonight or any other night flooded him with calm. And as she looked up at him, grateful and unsure, he picked up the teapot once more and refilled her mug without a word. He didn't think about tomorrow. He didn't dwell on the paperwork, the interviews, or what the system might demand next. All that mattered was this moment, quiet and tender for a frightened child who had finally found the courage to ask for help. He gave a faint smile, pouring a second cup for her and watching the steam rise between them. He just nodded and poured her a second cup. Thank you for watching. If you believe in standing up for those who can't stand for themselves, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories that shine a light on hidden truths. We appreciate your support.